The delegate from Manassas, Delegate Carter.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise for a point of personal privilege.
Delegate Carter, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We hear very often on this floor, particularly from the other side of the aisle, a very narrow, limited understanding of history. Madam Speaker, that narrow and limited understanding of history has blinders on it that puts out of sight and out of mind the atrocities that have been committed by this country. It puts out of sight and out of mind the genocide of Native Americans who lived on this land before we did. It puts out of sight and out of mind the hundreds of millions of Africans who were brought across the Atlantic and did not make it, against their will, and died en route. Madam Speaker, it denies the fundamental reality of what happened in Spain in the 1930s, where the United States government's opposition to working with socialists allowed a fascist dictatorship to take place under Francisco Franco, who was directly supported with military aid by Benito Mussolini and Adolf Hitler. Madam Speaker, it fundamentally denies the fact that the Dachau concentration camp in Germany was advertised in the newspaper as a place for the containment of socialists. Madam Speaker, it fundamentally denies the million socialists that were murdered in Indonesia in the 1960s. It fundamentally denies the socialists that were murdered by this government and people that this government supported in Central and South America throughout the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s. Madam Speaker, it denies the atrocities committed by the Contras, who were illegally supported by this government through the sale of weapons to Iran. It denies the people who died in the overthrowing of the Chilean government at the behest of mineral mining interests. It denies the deaths of those who were murdered in Iran when their government was overthrown with the support of the United States government at the behest of oil interests. It fundamentally denies the socialists that have been murdered by the United States government here in the United States, Madam Speaker. It fundamentally denies that people who believe what I believe, that people have a right to own and democratically operate their workplace. That's all. People who believe that folks have a right to own and democratically operate their workplace and to not go hungry in the streets have been rounded up and murdered in this country. Madam Speaker, it denies the people who died in Philadelphia when the Philadelphia Police Department bombed a neighborhood of row houses because there were socialists living in one of them. Madam Speaker, it denies the trade union members who have been murdered on the picket lines at the Battle of Blair Mountain, the Embarcadero Massacre in San Francisco, the Haymarket Massacre in Chicago. Madam Speaker, it fundamentally denies all those people who stood up and fought for peace and freedom and liberty. The freedom from want, the freedom from hunger, the freedom from persecution, and were killed for it. Madam Speaker, I've ignored these comments for far too long. I have not mentioned on this floor how members from the other side of the aisle repeatedly talk about cultural Marxism as though that is not a chapter in Mein Kampf. I have not spoken on this floor yet about how when I released a plan to guarantee health care for all 8.5 million Virginians, a member of that party's leadership sent out a mailer to 11,000 homes that compared me to Joseph Stalin. Madam Speaker, I will no longer stand here and allow them to revise history and allow them to ignore the suffering, the persecution, of people who believe that folks should not be starving in the streets while food goes to waste. I will not allow them to stand here and ignore the murders by the millions that have been committed to stop that peace and freedom and equality. Madam Speaker, I will not stand here and be silent anymore. This must end. Thank you.